The boat smells like death. That was Clara's first thought when Ezra Colt helped her into it. Not helped, loaded, the way a man loads a crate of salted fish. She didn't say anything. She gripped the splintered gunwale and watched the dock at Port Calder shrink behind them, the fog closing over it like a curtain being drawn on the only life she had ever known. Ezra sat at the stern, one hand on the tiller, his eyes fixed on the water ahead. He hadn't looked at her since the magistrate's office. Not once. He wore a canvas jacket so faded it had forgotten its original color, patched at both elbows with what appeared to be a different canvas entirely. His boots were held together with a doubled length of rope, where the leather had given up at the toe. He smelled of brine, tar, and something underneath. Something sharp and mineral, like old copper. Clara was 23 years old. 3 weeks ago she had been a school teacher with a salary, a rented room above the Calder General Store, and the reasonable assumption that her life would continue the way it had begun. Quiet, modest, hers. Then the school board dissolved. The town funds had dried up before anyone thought to mention it to the teacher. Her landlord, a man with a gift for timing, informed her on the same Tuesday that her position had ended, that her room would be needed for a paying boarder by Friday. She had $4.11. She had a trunk with a broken latch. She had no family within 300 miles, and the letter she sent to her aunt in Savannah had gone unanswered for 2 weeks, which meant either her aunt had not received it or her aunt had received it and made a deliberate choice. She was not naive. She understood which one was more likely. Ezra Colt had come into the general store on a Wednesday afternoon carrying a string of marsh bass that he traded for lamp oil, dried cornmeal, and a coil of rope. He had spoken to the storekeeper in monosyllables, paid without argument, and was nearly out the door when old Mr. Jolt Delacroix had said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Colt, you still looking for a woman willing to go out to the island?" The store went quiet the way a room does when someone says something everyone was already thinking. Ezra had stopped with his hand on the door frame. He hadn't turned around. "If there's one willing," he said. Clara's chest had tightened into something she recognized. Later, as the last moment she could have walked in another direction. She hadn't. The morning they left, the sky was the color of old pewter. The water was flat and gunmetal gray, and the egrets standing in the shallows looked like they'd been nailed there. Clara sat in the bow of the flat-bottomed skiff, with her trunk wedged in front of her, and her good coat buttoned to the throat, and tried to understand what she had agreed to. A caretaker, Mr. Delacroix had called it when she pressed him for details. You'd be keeping the house, cooking. The man lives out on Heron Point, isolated. He needs someone capable. She had not asked what happened to the last person who'd been capable. The channel between the mainland and Heron Point Island was only 4 miles of water, but the wind picked up halfway across, and the chop slapped hard against the hull, throwing spray into Clara's face. Her hair came loose from its pins immediately. She gripped the sides with both hands and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say, and because Ezra Colt had not struck her as a man who would find complaint interesting. "Cold," he said, the first word he'd spoken in 40 minutes. No, she was freezing. He reached behind him without looking, pulled a folded piece of canvas from under the stern seat, and tossed it forward. It landed across her knees. It was heavy, stiff with salt, and smelled like the bottom of a boat. She pulled it over her shoulders anyway. Heron Point Island appeared from the fog gradually, first a dark smear, then the shape of pine trees crowding to the water's edge, then a weathered dock jutting from a tangle of sawgrass and marsh elder. The dock needed repair. 2 of the boards were visibly rotted. A rusted iron cleat tilted at the end as if exhausted by the effort of remaining upright. Clara looked at the dock and understood, for the first time, the weight of the decision she had made. Ezra cut the motor and let the skiff glide in. He stepped out onto the dock with a rope, moving with the practiced economy of someone who has done the same thing 1,000 times without thinking about it. He tied off the bow without looking at her. He didn't offer his hand. Clara stood. The skiff rocked. She managed the step up to the dock without falling, which she counted as a victory. Her trunk was another matter. It weighed 40 pounds and she dragged it across the boards with both hands, the broken latch swinging. Ezra stood watching her. He didn't move to help. She got the trunk to the end of the dock. Her palms were burning. "Path's that way," Ezra said, and started walking. The path through the pines was overgrown, the ground soft and black, roots rising from the earth every few feet to catch her boots. Low Spanish moss dragged across her shoulders like cold fingers. The smell was extraordinary. Salt and pine resin and deep organic rot. The smell of a place that existed entirely on its own terms, and didn't particularly care if you appreciated that or not. The house appeared at the edge of the tree line and Clara stopped. She had expected a fishing shack, a one-room affair with a tin roof and a rusted stove, something functional and bleak, the kind of structure that announces clearly that the man living inside it has made his peace with minimalism. What she saw instead was a tar paper structure listing hard to port, a broken window repaired with cardboard and tape, a porch that had partially collapsed on the left side so that it tilted at a 10-degree angle. A single rocking chair sat in the middle of the intact portion, as if whoever sat in it preferred not to think too hard about the boards to the left. Clara's trunk hit the ground. "That's not," she started. "You'll sleep in the back room," Ezra said. He was already on the porch. "Stoveworks. Wood stacked on the east side. I'll be in the shop." "The shop," Clara repeated. "Boat repair." He held the door open, not gallantly, just functionally, the way someone holds a door so it doesn't slam. Clara picked up her trunk and went inside. The interior was dim. 2 windows, one with the cardboard repair, the other intact but filmed with salt haze. A table. 2 chairs that didn't match. An iron stove that was, as advertised, functional. A low fire burning inside it that made the room bearable. A shelf with 3 cans, a tin of coffee, and a kerosene lamp. A braided rug on the plank floor, worn through to the backing at the center. Her room was a small space off the back, a cot with a wool blanket, a nail on the wall for her coat, a window that looked out into the pines. Clara sat on the edge of the cot. She placed both palms on her knees and looked at the wall. She was 4 miles from the mainland with a man who spoke in 6 words or fewer and a trunk that wouldn't close properly. She had enough money for nothing. The next boat to the mainland would be, she didn't know. She hadn't thought to ask. She sat there until the cold in the cot started working through her coat. Then she got up and went to find the woodpile. The first week was an education in silence. Ezra was up before dawn, gone to his shop, a separate structure near the water's edge, before Clara's eyes had properly adjusted to the gray light. He came back at midday to eat whatever she put on the table, which he did standing at the counter most days, his eyes on the middle distance, his attention somewhere she couldn't follow. He ate with efficiency rather than appetite. He washed his plate. He left. He came back in the evening. He sat at the table. He ate. Occasionally he said something about the weather or the state of a particular boat he was working on, in the tone of a man making a note in a logbook rather than having a conversation. Clara cooked. She scrubbed the floors, which had not been scrubbed in what appeared to be years. She found a bucket of whitewash in the lean-to and applied it to the interior walls, which improved the light considerably. She repaired the broken porch boards with wood from a fallen pine, using a handsaw and nails from a tin she found in the kitchen, which took most of an afternoon and left her hands blistered, but produced a structurally sound result. She was angry. She was not going to pretend otherwise. She was angry about the deception of the place, about the dock and the tilted porch and the cardboard window, about being dropped into someone else's decay and expected to manage it without comment. She scrubbed things because the alternative was sitting with her anger in a room that was too small for it. On the 4th day, she discovered a leak in the roof above the back room. She put a pot under it, lay awake listening to it drip, and in the morning went to find Ezra in his shop. The shop door was open. She stopped in the doorway. The space was large, much larger than she'd expected. Skylights she hadn't seen from outside let in long bars of pale morning light. 2 boats occupied the floor. One a wide-beamed oyster skiff with its bottom planking stripped for replacement, the other a sleek mahogany runabout that didn't belong anywhere near this island, its varnished hull gleaming in the natural light. Ezra stood at a workbench with his back to her, fitting a piece of mahogany trim with a small handplane. The shavings curled onto the floor in pale, perfect ribbons. The tools hanging on the wall behind him were immaculate, organized by type, by size, by function, with the quiet logic of someone who thinks in systems. The runabout's hardware, cleats, hinges, fittings, was solid brass, the kind of brass that didn't come cheap. Clara looked at the mahogany runabout, then at the rusted cleat on the dock outside. "The roof's leaking," she said. Ezra set down the plane. "Which part?" "Above the back room, northeast corner." "I'll look at it tonight." He looked at it that evening. He was on the roof for an hour and a half with a pail of roofing pitch, while Clara stood in the back room below and confirmed, ceilingward, when the leak had stopped. He came down with pitch on his arms to the elbow and said, "Should hold," and went to wash up. "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded. He didn't say you're welcome. He went to bed. On the 7th night, a squall came through. It wasn't violent, but it was persistent, a solid wall of rain and wind that pressed against the windows and made the stovepipe drone. Clara lit the lamp and sat at the table with a book she'd brought in her trunk, the words sliding off her eyes without sticking. She could hear the water. She hadn't understood before this island how differently water sounded when it was everywhere, under you, around you, falling on top of you. The back door opened and Ezra came in, soaked through. He'd been in the shop, apparently, though she hadn't heard him cross the yard. He pulled off his jacket and hung it on the hook and moved to the stove without looking at her. He set a kettle on the iron surface and leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, waiting for it to heat. "You always work this late?" Clara asked. "Job needs finishing," he said. "Whose boat is the runabout?" Ezra was quiet for a moment. "Mine," he said. Clara looked at him over the lamp. "You own a mahogany runabout." "I built it." "In a shop with skylights and brass hardware." He didn't answer. The kettle began to murmur. "The dock has a cleat that's about to fall off," Clara said. "I noticed it the first day." "I know." The porch was half collapsed. "I know." "Why?" She started and stopped. She looked at her book. She looked back at him. "Why does everything out here look like it's been abandoned? And everything in that shop looks like it's worth more than this house?" Ezra took the kettle off the stove. He poured 2 mugs of hot water, added coffee from the tin, and set one in front of her without being asked. He took the other to his chair. He had a chair, she had noticed, that was slightly distinct from the other in that he consistently sat in it, as if they had arrived at this arrangement through some negotiation she hadn't been present for. He sat. He looked at the coffee. He said, "You see the dock, and you fix the porch. You don't wait to be told." Clara said nothing. "Previous woman I hired," Ezra said, "sat down the second day and told me she'd come to be a housekeeper, not a carpenter, and that if I wanted the porch fixed, I could do it myself." He took a slow drink. "She was back on the mainland inside 2 weeks." "What happened to her?" "Nothing happened to her. She left. Said the island was no place for a person with any sense." He set the mug down. She wasn't wrong. Clara thought about that. "So you judge the people you hire by whether they fix things without being asked." "I judge people by whether they engage with what's actually in front of them," Ezra said, "or whether they decide what's in front of them is beneath them." The wind hit the windows hard, and both of them looked up reflexively, then back down. The lamp flame bent and recovered. "That's a strange way to hire a housekeeper," Clara said. "I wasn't looking for a housekeeper," Ezra said. He picked up his mug and went to bed. Clara sat at the table for a long time after that, listening to the rain, her coffee going cold in her hands. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Clara learned the island the way you learn a language you didn't choose, by immersion and necessity. She learned which parts of the shore were safe to walk at low tide and which were ankle-breaking mud. She learned that the egrets came to the East Marsh at dawn and were worth the walk. She learned that the pines made a particular sound in a northeast wind that was different from any other direction, lower and longer, like something breathing. She learned that Ezra Colt worked with his hands the way other men worked with words, fluently, without hesitation, with a precision that was, if you watched long enough, its own kind of eloquence. She had watched him once through the shop window, fitting a frame piece on the oyster skiff, his movements so certain and economical that she felt something she didn't immediately recognize as admiration. She swept it aside. He was difficult. He communicated in the minimum number of words required and sometimes fewer. He didn't explain himself. He went entire days without speaking at all, and when she spoke he listened with a quality of attention that was disconcerting, not absent but dense, like he was filing what she said somewhere precise. He was also, she noticed, quietly and consistently thorough. The woodpile was restocked before she had to ask. The skiff was at the dock every morning, tied with a fresh line. The lamp oil was replenished. The hinges on the front door that had squealed since she arrived were one morning silent. He had oiled them sometime in the night, without mentioning it. She stopped being certain about him the way she had been certain the first day. It was 5 weeks in when she found the room. She had been cleaning. There was a door at the end of the back hallway she'd assumed was a closet. The latch was stiff, the door flush with the wall, but she was doing a full inventory of the house for practical reasons, because she'd run out of lamp oil and needed to know where he kept the spare. She worked the latch with some effort, and the door swung open. It was not a closet. It was a room twice the size of the room she slept in, with a window facing south that let in the full afternoon light. The walls were shelved to the ceiling, and the shelves held books, hundreds of them, arranged with the same systematic logic as the tools in the shop. On the center table was a drafting board, and on the drafting board was a set of plans so detailed and so precisely rendered that Clara leaned forward and forgot to breathe. They were boat designs. Complex, beautiful, mathematically exact. One she recognized after a moment. It was the runabout in the shop, rendered at a scale of 1 inch to the foot, with every joint and fitting and dimensions specified in a handwriting so small and controlled it was almost print. Below the designs on the table were letters. She didn't mean to read them, but her eye caught the letterhead on the top one. Haverford Marine Works, Charleston. She caught a phrase before she looked away. The commission for the St. Augustine Harbor Commission has been approved. Clara stepped back out of the room. She pulled the door shut. She stood in the hallway with her palm flat against the wall and let her heart settle. She did not go looking for Ezra right away. She went back to the kitchen and finished her inventory and found the spare lamp oil in the lean-to exactly where she should have thought to look first. She filled the lamp. She sat at the table. She thought, the dock with the rusted cleat, the porch that had been allowed to rot, the cardboard in the window, Ezra Colt in his disintegrating boots and his salt-stiff jacket, buying cornmeal with fish, the room full of books, the plans so precise they looked like engineering drawings, the letter from a marine works company in Charleston. She thought about the woman before her who had gone back to the mainland. She thought about what Ezra had said. I wasn't looking for a housekeeper. She sat with it for 2 days. She said nothing. She turned it over. On the second evening she set 2 plates on the table at dinner instead of 1. She had made fish chowder, properly, with cream she'd asked him to bring from the mainland on his last supply run, and salt pork and fresh thyme from the 3 pots she planted on the south-facing windowsill. Ezra sat. He ate. He was nearly through before he said, "This is good." "I know it is," Clara said. He looked at her briefly with something she hadn't seen before. then back down at the bowl. "I found the room," she said. "The one at the end of the hall." A pause. He set the spoon down. "I wasn't going through your things," she said. "I was looking for lamp oil." "I know," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I should have shown you." "Why didn't you?" Ezra turned his mug slowly on the table. "I wanted to see what you'd do," he said. "Whether you'd say something, or whether you'd hold it over me." Clara looked at him steadily. "And what if I had held it over you?" "Then I'd have known," he said simply. She felt the anger come up, clean and hot. "You let me live for 5 weeks thinking I'd come to the poorest place on the Georgia coast, and all along." "I didn't lie to you," Ezra said. He wasn't defensive. He was precise. "I told you I needed someone capable. I told you the island was isolated. Both of those things are true. You let me believe." "I let you draw your own conclusions," he said, "from what was in front of you." She stared at him. He met her eyes and held them. "You know what was in front of me?" Clara said, her voice very even. "A dock that needed fixing. A porch I fixed myself. A roof that leaked. A man who doesn't speak in full sentences." "Yes," Ezra said. "That's what you showed me." "That's the island," he said. "That's the real thing. The work I do, the money it earns, that's separate. The island doesn't care about the Charleston Commission. The marsh doesn't care about the mahogany runabout. I needed to know if you cared about the island, or if you only cared about the rest of it." Clara breathed slowly through her nose. "So you tested me, like an experiment." "Like a man who's been taken before," Ezra said very quietly. All the precision went out of his voice. "What was underneath? It was something old and unhealed. The woman before you. I brought her out here in a good boat, laid everything out at the front, showed her the accounts and the work and the business correspondence. She stayed 14 months. She was charming and practical, and very clear about what the arrangement was worth to her. When she left, she took the account ledger, copied my client's contact information, and spent the next 2 years telling people in Charleston that she'd managed the Heron Point workshop herself." The fire in the stove clicked. Rain began again on the roof, soft, without urgency. "That's why the window has cardboard in it," Clara said. Ezra said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "And the dock." "The dock needs fixing," he said. "I've been meaning to get to it." "I'll help," Clara said. She didn't know entirely why she said it, but she said it and she meant it, and neither of those things surprised her as much as they probably should have. Ezra looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. They fixed the dock the following Saturday. It took most of the morning, pulling the rotten boards, cutting new ones to length, Ezra on his knees with the hammer and Clara holding the boards plumb. Her hands got splinters. She dug them out with a needle and didn't say anything about it. By noon, the dock was sound, and the new board smelled of pine, and the rusted cleat had been replaced with a solid bronze one that Ezra produced from a box in the shop without comment. They stood at the end of the finished dock and looked at the water. "I owe you an explanation," Ezra said without preamble. "Full one." "You owe me the truth," Clara said. "Not an explanation." He was quiet for a moment, considering the distinction. Then he nodded. "Haverford Marine Works contracts me for design work. Custom builds for private clients. 3 builds a year, sometimes 4. It's—" he paused. "It's enough. More than enough." "Why does no one know?" "People who need the work know," he said. "I don't want the people who want to be near the work to find me." Clara thought about that. She thought about her $4.11, about the Tuesday the school board dissolved, about the letter to her aunt that had gone unanswered. "I'm not interested in your accounts," she said. "I know that," Ezra said. There was something different in his voice. Not warmth, exactly. Ezra Colt didn't do warmth the way ordinary people did, but something had shifted, like a door that had been closed against its own weight and had finally, after sufficient pressure, decided to rest open. "You fixed the porch before I could have paid you for it." "The porch needed fixing," Clara said. Yes, he said, and then, I know. He reached into the pocket of his canvas jacket, still faded, still salt-stiff, she noticed, because that wasn't performance, that was just how he lived, and pulled out a key. Not a ring of keys, just one. Small, flat, brass. He held it out. Clara looked at it. What does that open? The shop, Ezra said. The whole shop. The supply ledger, the client files, the commission records. He held it steady, not pressing it toward her, just making it available. I run supply to the mainland second and fourth Friday of the month. You'd need the ledger to know what to order, if you wanted that. Clara looked at the key. She understood what it was. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't a declaration. It was the only language Ezra Colt appeared to speak when it came to trust. Direct, practical, without embellishment. She thought about the schoolroom in Port Calder, which she had swept and ordered and made into something that functioned well. She thought about how it had felt to do work that mattered with her whole attention. What about the lamp oil? She said. Where do you actually keep the spare? Lean to, he said. Right side, behind the crab traps. I found it, she said. That's not where I said I'd keep it. Ezra blinked. Where would you keep it? Inside, she said. In the kitchen cabinet, next to the stove. So it's there when you need it. A pause. That makes more sense, he said. I know it does. Clara took the key from his hand. The brass was warm from his pocket. She closed her fingers around it. Second and fourth Friday, she said. I'll have the list ready by Thursday evening. Ezra looked at her. Really looked, the way he did in the shop when he was fitting something precisely, when he needed to see exactly what he was working with, and what it could actually hold. All right, he said. They walked back up the dock together, not touching, not saying anything further. The egrets had come to the east marsh. The pines made their low sound in the offshore wind. The island smelled of salt and pitch, and the particular aliveness of a place that doesn't ask to be appreciated. Clara hung the key on the nail by the back door, next to her coat. That evening she made cornbread with the last of the good flour and put it on the table, and they ate it without talking much. The lamp between them, the rain starting up again, soft and even on the new boards of the sound dock. At some point, Ezra refilled her coffee without being asked, and she said thank you without looking up from her book, and he sat back down and went on reading his own, and neither of them felt the need to make anything more of it than it was. Outside, the marsh moved in the dark the way it always had, indifferent and alive, and the light in the window of the house on Heron Point burned steadily against it, small and warm and entirely sufficient. I keep thinking about the dock, that rotted, tilted, embarrassing dock, and the fact that Clara fixed the porch before anyone asked her to. That's the whole story, really. Not the mansion reveal, not the twist, not the brass key. It's that one quiet moment when a person decides to engage with what's actually in front of them instead of what they wish were in front of them. Clara didn't fix the porch because she was trying to impress anyone. She fixed it because it needed fixing, and she was the person standing there. That's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up with a handsaw. What I find myself returning to is how much of life gets decided in exactly that kind of unglamorous moment. Not the dramatic ones, not the blizzard, or the revelation, or the confrontation at the gate, the quiet Tuesday morning when there's something broken in front of you and you have to decide whether it's your problem or not. Clara decided it was, every time, and that steady, unsentimental commitment to what was real and present. That's what Ezra couldn't find anywhere else and couldn't manufacture through any amount of charm or comfort. Ezra understood something that I think most people learn too late, if they learn it at all, that you can't know what someone is made of by watching them in good conditions. You find out what a person is made of by watching them when the floor is soft, when the window is cardboard, when no one is looking and there's nothing to gain. He was wrong to withhold the truth. I think he'd be the first to admit that now. But he wasn't wrong about what he was looking for. He was looking for someone whose character existed independently of circumstance, Someone who would be the same person in the rough shack and in the room full of books. That's rare, and the reason it's rare is that most of us, without realizing it, let our surroundings do too much of our deciding for us. We rise to good environments and shrink in difficult ones, and we tell ourselves that's just human nature. Maybe it is, but Clara didn't, and neither in his own blunt and imperfect way did Ezra. He built something real and precise and valuable out on an island where no one was watching and no one was applauding. What stays with me, honestly, is not the romance of it. It's the intellectual honesty. Both of them finally arrived at Clara, naming the deception plainly, Ezra owning it without defensiveness, both of them choosing to look at the situation as it actually was, rather than as they wanted it to be. That takes a particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with bravado. It's the courage of accuracy, of saying, this is what happened, this is what I did, this is what I'm choosing now. I think the dock is the right image to end on. Two people, no ceremony, pulling rotten boards and fitting new ones. The work itself as the declaration. The finished thing, solid, useful, built to last, as the only promise that actually means anything. Sometimes that's what trust looks like. Not a speech, just a sound dock and a bronze cleat that won't rust.